It is the 4th hour after midnight on the open plains of western Kansas, in the autumn of 1878, and the stove in the corner of a one-room house has gone down to a dull red seam behind its iron door. Outside there is nothing to see. The grass runs flat in every direction for 40 miles, and the wind moves across it the way water moves, in long, slow folds, and the sound of that is the only sound there is. A loose shingle lifts and settles somewhere above the ceiling boards. A horse shifts its weight in the lean-to against the north wall. Inside, the air has cooled to the point where breath would show if there were light enough to see it. There is a smell of ash and cold bacon grease, and the dry green smell of the prairie hay stuffed into the mattress ticking. 5 people are asleep in this room. 2 of them are in the one proper bed, under a quilt made out of the good parts of worn-out clothing. 2 more are on a straw tick on the floor along the west wall. The oldest is in a chair by the stove, because he has not slept flat in 11 years. Nobody is going to get up for another half an hour. The clock on the shelf, which is wound every Sunday, whether it needs it or not, has been ticking since 1864, and it goes on ticking now into the dark. We are going to stay here for a while, not out on the trail, and not in any of the stories about gunfights at noon, but here, in the ordinary hours, where almost everybody actually lived. There is nothing you need to do tonight, and nothing you need to remember. This is history, told very slowly. You do not have to follow the dates, or hold on to the names, or stay awake to the end of it. If you drift off somewhere in the middle of a sentence, that is exactly what this was made for. So let your shoulders sink down into the bed. Let the day go out of your hands. Let your breathing get long and even. We will stay on this one stretch of grass, and in the small, dusty town 4 miles east of it, through one ordinary day in the autumn of 1878, the stove and the water bucket, the cattle and the horses, and the long, careful work of them, the main street with its false fronts, the store, the smithy, the barber chair, the rain that does not come and the winter that does, the lamp in the evening and the sound the grass makes all night. It was a life of very small things, done very carefully, by people who were mostly tired, mostly poor, and almost never in a gunfight. There is no hurry at all. Whenever you are ready, close your eyes. The house is 12 feet by 16, and it is built of pine boards, hauled 110 miles by wagon, which is exactly why it is so small. Before this house, there was another one, and that one was made out of the ground itself. When the family came out in 74, they cut the sod into bricks about 1 foot wide and 3 inches thick, with a special plow that peeled the prairie up in long ribbons, and they stacked those bricks grass side down into walls 2 feet through. A house like that cost almost nothing but labor. It was warm in January and cool in July, and it was very dark, and when it rained hard, the roof dripped mud for 2 days after the weather had cleared. They lived in it for 3 years. The wife hung muslin sheeting under the ceiling to catch the dirt and the insects that came down out of the sod, and washed it twice a month, and there is still a way she glances up at a ceiling when she comes into a room. This house, the board house, has a plank floor. That is the thing they are proudest of. A floor you can sweep. Instead of a floor you have to sprinkle with water so the dust will lie down. The boards have shrunk in the dry air, and there are gaps between them wide enough to lose a coin through, and the wind comes up between them all winter. Nobody complains about this out loud. At the center of everything is a cast-iron cook stove, and it is the single most valuable object the family owns. It came out on the freight wagon in pieces, weighs near 400 pounds put together, and cost more than the plough and the wagon box together. It has 4 round lids on the top, an oven on one side, and a reservoir on the other that holds 3 gallons of water and keeps it hot all day, on no extra fuel at all, which is the kind of small mercy that people out here notice and are grateful for. The stove is never allowed to go entirely out from October through April. At night, the last of the fire is shut down tight with the dampers, so that it holds a few coals under the ash until morning. Starting a fire from nothing, in the dark, with cold hands, is a thing a woman only has to do a few times before she learns to bank it properly. The trouble is what to burn. There are no trees, there is no coal within 100 miles that anybody here can afford. So they burn what the country gives them, which is twisted hay, corn stalks, sunflower stems, and dried cattle dung, gathered off the range in a wagon through the autumn, stacked in a heap by the door, and handled without any particular feeling about it at all. It burns hot and fast and clean, and it smells faintly of dry grass, and it is entirely ordinary here. At 4:30, the woman of the house wakes without being called, the way she has for 20 years, and lies still for a moment in the dark, listening to the wind to find out what kind of day it is going to be. Then she gets up. The floor is cold. She does not light the lamp yet, because coal oil is 30 cents a gallon, and there is no reason to burn it when she can find the stove with her hands. She opens the damper, rakes the ash forward, lays in a double handful of twisted hay, and blows once, low and steady. The coals take. She feeds it up until there is enough light coming through the draft holes to move around by, and only then does she reach for the lamp, lift the chimney off it, and touch a splinter of burning hay to the wick. The room comes up out of the dark inside a small round of yellow light, the table, the 2 chairs, and the bench. The shelf with the clock, the tin of soda, and the family Bible. 4 coats on 4 nails. She fills the kettle from the bucket by the door, and the water has a film of ice on it this morning, the first of the year, and she notices that and says nothing about it. Behind her, in the chair by the stove, the old man opens his eyes and does not move. Coffee comes into this house green, in a paper sack, and it is roasted at home in a shallow pan on the stove top, shaken and stirred until the whole room fills with a smell so good that everybody stops whatever they are doing for a moment. Then it is ground. The mill is screwed to the wall beside the door, and grinding is a child job, and the child does not mind it, because it is warm work and it is done sitting down. The coffee itself is boiled, not brewed. The grounds go straight into the pot with the water. It is brought up to a rolling boil, and then a little cold water or a crushed eggshell is stirred in to settle everything to the bottom. It comes out thick and very dark, and it would take the varnish off a chair. They drink an enormous amount of it. 4 cups before the sun is properly up is not remarkable. When money is short, and money is usually short, the coffee is stretched with parched barley, or roasted rye, or chicory root dug out of the ditch and dried, and everyone pretends not to notice the difference. Out on the range the cattle outfits make it the same way, in a blackened pot at the edge of the fire, and the rule out there is that the pot is never emptied and never washed, only filled again. The first cup of the day is poured before anybody has said a word. Getting dressed takes almost no time, partly because most of them are already half-dressed, and partly because there is very little to choose from. A man has 2 shirts. One is on him and one is on the line or in the wash pile, and they are both pullover shirts of heavy cotton or flannel, collarless, with 3 buttons at the throat, and long tails that are worn tucked in, and that also serve as night clothes. His trousers are wool or heavy brown duck cloth, held up with suspenders, because a belt out here is a thing for carrying tools and not usually for holding up trousers. Underneath all of it is a union suit, 1 piece, wrist to ankle, and in the winter it is not taken off at all. The woman puts on a chemise, then a corset of jean cloth stiffened with cording rather than steel, then 1 or 2 petticoats, then a plain calico dress made from 6 yards of printed cotton that cost 8 cents a yard at the store. Over that goes an apron, and the apron is what she is actually wearing all day. It carries eggs, it lifts hot pot handles, it wipes hands and faces, and it is changed when company comes. The children wear whatever was outgrown by somebody older, cut down and hemmed and let out again. Boots are the one thing that has to be bought, and they are worn until they cannot be mended any more, and then a little longer. The water comes from a well 80 feet deep, and every drop of it that gets into the house is lifted by hand. Digging that well took 3 men most of a summer, working down through sand and clay and 1 bad seam of shale, with a windlass set over the hole and a bucket on a rope, and one of them at the bottom in the dark. Out here the water lies low, and a shallow well means a dry well by August, and a dry well means selling out and going back east. So the bucket goes down 80 feet and comes up 80 feet, hand over hand, on a rope that has to be replaced twice a year, and the water comes up cold enough to ache in the teeth. Washing day takes 20 gallons or more, which is 15 trips to the well. Water for the horses is another matter again, and that is why the family is saving, quietly and slowly, for a windmill. A steel windmill on a wooden tower costs upward of $120, and it will pump all day for nothing but wind, and out here there is always wind. Half the families on this road are saving for the same thing. Nothing is thrown away. Wash water goes on the garden. Rinse water goes to the chickens. The last of the dishwater goes on the dust in front of the door. By 6:15, the sky in the east has gone the color of skimmed milk, and the land begins to come back out of the dark, and it is enormous. That is the thing nobody was prepared for when they came out from Ohio and Kentucky and Sweden and Bohemia, not the work which they expected, not the loneliness which they suspected, the size. There is nothing to stop the eye, no hedge, no wood, no hill worth the name. The grass runs to the edge of the world, and then it goes over it. From the door, you can see 3 other houses. One is 2 miles north, and shows only as a dark point with a smear of smoke standing above it. One is 1.5 miles east, where the Nelsons are, and one is so far south that on most mornings it is not there at all, and on clear cold ones it is. The sun comes up very fast on the plains, because there is nothing for the light to climb over. It sits for a moment on the grass line, red and flattened out of its own shape, and then it is up, and the frost along the wagon tongue turns silver and then turns to nothing. The horses in the lean-to hear the door and start to move against the poles. Breakfast is the biggest meal of the day, because the work between breakfast and dinner is the hardest work there is. There is bacon, cut thick off a side that hangs wrapped in cloth in the lean-to, fried until the fat runs out of it. There are eggs, if the hens are laying, and in October they still are. There is bread, or more often biscuits, mixed that morning with soda and sour milk and lard, cut out with the top of a tin can, and baked 12 minutes in the oven. And there is gravy, made in the bacon pan with a spoonful of flour and a cup of milk, and poured over everything, because gravy is how a small amount of meat feeds 5 people. They eat at a table built out of the boards of a packing crate, on white ironstone plates that came out wrapped inside a quilt, and only 2 of which broke on the road. The forks have 3 tines. The knives are used for cutting and also for carrying food to the mouth, and nobody at this table would find that strange. The old man says a grace of 11 words that has not changed since 1851. They eat quickly and mostly without talking, and the boy is out of his chair before he has finished chewing, because the chickens will not wait. By 7, the house has been swept, and it looks exactly as it did yesterday, because there is only 1 room, and everything in it has to earn its place. The bed in the corner is the parents'. It has a rope frame, tightened with a wooden key every few weeks when it starts to sag, and on top of the ropes is a tick filled with prairie hay, and on top of that a second thinner tick filled with feathers saved from every goose and chicken the family has ever killed. It has taken 4 years to fill that one properly. The straw tick on the floor is rolled up and pushed under the bed for the day. The old man keeps his chair. There is a trunk that came out from Ohio, with everything they owned inside it, and it is now used as a seat, a table, and a bench, and the good dress and the good coat are folded flat in the bottom of it, with newspaper between the layers. There is a curtain of calico strung on a wire across one corner. That corner is where a person goes to change clothes, and it is the only privacy anyone in this family has. On the wall by the door hangs a mirror the size of a hand, and beside it a comb, and beside that a lithograph of a river valley in a place none of them have ever been. Flour comes in a cotton sack of 50 pounds, and the sack is worth almost as much as what is inside it. When it is empty, it is unpicked at the seams, boiled to fade the printing, and made into towels, pillow slips, underclothes, and curtains. There are women in this county who can tell you which mill a girl dress was made from by the shadow of the lettering still in the weave. Bread is made twice a week, and it takes most of a day around the edges of everything else. The starter lives in a crock at the back of the shelf where the stove keeps it warm, and it is fed with flour and water, and it has been alive since the family came out. Some of these starters were carried west in a wagon, wrapped in a shawl, kept alive across 600 miles of road. The dough is mixed at night, set to rise near the stove under a cloth, punched down in the morning, shaped, risen again, and baked in an oven with no thermometer. The way to test it is to hold a hand inside and count. If you can count to 20 without pulling away, it is too cool. If you cannot get to 8, the loaves will burn. The bread comes out heavy, faintly sour, and pale on top because the oven is hotter at the bottom and there is never quite enough of it. Under the floor at the back of the house, reached by a trapdoor and a short ladder, is a hole in the ground 6 feet deep, lined with boards, and this is the whole of the family food security. There are potatoes in the sand, laid in layers so that they do not touch. There are turnips and cabbages hung by their roots from the joists. There is a barrel of salt pork with the meat pressed down under brine, and a smaller barrel of sauerkraut going quietly sour in the dark. There are the jars. All summer the woman of the house has been putting up whatever grew or could be gathered, sealed with wax and covered with cloth, and the shelf now holds tomatoes, wild plums, gooseberries, and a dark jam made from sand cherries that grow along the draw a mile west. There is a crock of eggs in a solution of lime and water, which will keep them edible until March, and which makes them taste faintly of the crock. There is not one single thing down there that anybody bought. That is the arithmetic of this life. What is in the cellar in October is what there is to eat in February, and everybody in this house knows within a jar or two how much of it there is. The chickens belong to the woman, and so does the money they make, and that is the general rule across the whole of this country. There are 26 of them. They are fed on cracked corn and whatever they can find, and they wander loose all day, and at dusk they put themselves away into a low shed made of sod and boards. The eggs go into a basket, and the basket goes to town on Saturday, and they are not sold for cash, but traded at the store against flour and sugar and coal oil. Egg money is how the small necessary things of a family arrive. Shoes, thread, school slates, a tin of pepper. In a bad year, egg money is how a family stays on its land. The cow is a different matter. She is milked at 5:30, and again at 5:30, morning and evening, in all weathers, for as long as she is in milk. She is fed hay in winter and grazed on the section line in summer, tethered on a long chain so she does not walk into somebody's wheat. Her milk is set in shallow pans in the coolest corner. The cream is skimmed off the top after 12 hours, and the cream is churned into butter twice a week by whichever child is least useful elsewhere. It takes about 40 minutes of steady work, and everybody hates it. Monday is washing day, and it is the worst day of the week. And there is no argument about that from anybody who has ever done it. It begins with the water, which is 20 gallons carried up out of the well and heated on the stove in a copper boiler. And it begins really at dawn, because the whole day is going to be needed. The clothes are sorted, and the soap is shaved into the water. The soap is made at home in the spring, out of wood ash leached into lye, and the fat saved from a year of cooking, boiled together in a kettle in the yard until it comes to the right ropey thickness, and it is brown and soft, and it takes the skin off your knuckles. Then the rubbing. Every piece goes onto a board of ridged wood and is worked against it by hand, and the heavy things, the trousers and the sheets, are worked longest. Then boiling, then rinsing twice, then the bluing, a little sachet of blue dye swirled in the last rinse, to cheat the eye into seeing white instead of grey. Then wringing everything by hand. By the time it is on the line, the woman has lifted, wrung and hung something close to 200 pounds of wet cloth, and her hands are raw to the wrist, and it is only Monday afternoon. The week has a shape, and everybody keeps to it, because a routine is the only thing that stops a life like this from coming apart. Monday is washing, Tuesday is ironing, done with flat irons heated on the stove top, 3 of them in rotation, so that one is always hot, each one lifted with a folded cloth and pressed until it cools, and then swapped for the next. Wednesday is mending, which is endless, because clothes here are repaired far past the point where anybody now would keep them. Thursday is churning and the garden. Friday is cleaning, floors and lamps and the stovepipe. Saturday is baking and the trip to town. Sunday is church, if the weather allows, and the preacher has come. And otherwise it is reading and rest, and the one day when nobody cuts a piece of wood. Inside that frame there is the daily part, which never stops. 3 meals, the cow twice, the chickens, the water, the fire, the children, the garden in season. There is a saying about all this, that women out here repeated to each other, half as a joke and half as something else. A man works from sun to sun, and a woman work is never done. They said it flatly, the way you say a thing that is simply true. When the sun goes down out here, it goes down completely, and the whole question of the evening becomes a question of light. The lamp burns kerosene, which everybody calls coal oil, and it costs about 30 cents a gallon at the store, and a family will use 2 or 3 gallons in a winter month and think carefully about every hour of it. The chimney has to be cleaned every single day, wiped out with newspaper because cloth leaves lint, or the glass blackens and the light goes yellow and dim. The wick has to be trimmed level with scissors, and trimmed badly, it will smoke and smell and leave a fine soot on everything in the room. One lamp is what most families have. It is set in the middle of the table, and the whole household arranges itself around that single small circle, and the corners of the room stay dark all evening. Before the lamp there were candles, molded at home out of tallow, and they smell of what they are, and they gutter. Before candles there were rushlights and grease lamps. Nobody in this house has forgotten any of that. The good light of the day is worth more than money, and that is why they get up at 4:30. If you made a list of everything in this house, it would not be a long list, and that is worth sitting with for a moment. 1 stove, 1 bed, 1 trunk, 1 table, 2 chairs, 1 bench, 1 rocking chair belonging to the old man, 5 plates, 5 cups, 4 bowls that do not match, 1 skillet, 1 Dutch oven, 1 boiler, 1 kettle, 3 crocks, 1 lamp and 1 spare chimney, 1 clock, 1 mirror, 1 washboard, 1 churn, 2 buckets, 1 tub, 1 rifle over the door, and 1 shotgun in the corner, 1 Bible, 1 almanac, an arithmetic book, and a bundle of newspapers 3 months old that have been read aloud twice each and are now waiting to be pasted on the wall for insulation. Outside there is 1 wagon, 1 plough, 1 harrow, 2 horses, 1 cow, 26 chickens, and a dog with no particular breed and no particular name. That is a whole family. Everything else they have is either eaten, worn out, or growing. And they would not have described themselves as poor. Poor was the family down at the creek with no cow. They had a cow, a floor, a stove, and 160 acres, and by the reckoning of the time and the place, that was doing perfectly well. If you could stand in the doorway of that house with your eyes closed, you would know a great deal about it in about 4 seconds. Wood smoke first, or rather grass smoke, which is finer and sweeter and gets into the wool of everything. Then bacon fat, which never entirely leaves a kitchen where it is used every day. Then coffee. Then the faint sourness of the bread starter in its crock on the shelf. Under all that, the smell of people who bathe on Saturday nights in a tin tub, in water that is used by one after another in an agreed order, starting with the cleanest and ending with whoever has been out in the yard. And under that, the prairie itself. Dry grass, dust, the ashy mineral smell of the ground, and after a rain, an almost sweet dampness that people out here can smell coming a full hour before the weather arrives. The house is not dirty. It is swept every day and scrubbed once a week, and the woman of it would be quietly furious if you suggested otherwise. It is simply that 5 people and a stove and a small hard life are all living in 12 feet by 16, and the room is honest about it. The 2 horses are worth more than the house, and they are treated accordingly. They are not the tall, glossy animals of the paintings. They are about 14½ hands, deep in the chest, short in the back, with heavy legs and unremarkable brown coats and a great deal of sense. One of them came off the range and was broken at 4 years old, and has never entirely forgiven anybody for it. They are fed hay and a little corn when there is corn to spare, and in summer they are turned out to graze, and their feet are looked at every single day, because a lame horse in October is a wagon that does not go to town. Harnessing takes about 10 minutes and is done in the same order every time, and the leather is oiled once a month with neatsfoot oil and mended with a needle and waxed thread whenever it splits, which is often. A man out here can tell you the price of a horse in Dodge City this month, the age of every horse on the 4 sections around him, and which of his neighbours is hard on an animal. That last one matters. It is close to the worst thing you can say about a person in this county, and it is never said loudly. The boy is allowed to lead them, and not yet allowed to drive them. The ground out here had never been turned over in the whole history of the world before these people put a plough into it, and it did not give way easily. Prairie sod is a mat of grass roots 4 to 6 inches deep, packed so tight it is closer to felt than to soil, and it will stop an ordinary plough dead. So they used a breaking plough with a long sloping steel mouldboard that rolls the sod over in one continuous ribbon and lays it upside down, and it makes a sound going through that people described afterwards as a kind of steady tearing. 2 horses can break about 1.5 acres in a long day, walking perhaps 11 miles to do it, and the man walks every one of those miles behind them with the handles in his fists, correcting the depth with his shoulders. The overturned sod is then left to rot for a season, because grass roots that thick will not simply die because you asked them to. 160 acres, broken at 1.5 acres a day, is more than 100 working days. Most families never broke all of it. They broke 40 acres, then 60, then in a good year 80, and left the rest in grass for the cattle, which, as it turned out, was very often the wiser thing anyway. What they plant is winter wheat and corn, and a patch of sorghum for the syrup, and that is essentially the whole of it. Winter wheat goes in during September and October. It comes up, makes a few inches of green, and then sits under the snow all winter doing nothing anybody can see, and starts again in March. It is harvested in late June or early July with a reaper, if there is a reaper in the neighborhood, and if not, with a cradle scythe, which is a scythe with a set of wooden fingers on it to lay the cut stalks in a neat row. Then it is bound into sheaves by hand, and the sheaves are stood up in shocks of 8 or 10 to keep the heads off the ground, and the shocks stand in the field, looking like small tents, until the threshing outfit comes around. Corn is planted in May in rows, cultivated 3 times, and picked by hand in the autumn, 1 ear at a time, into a wagon driven alongside with a high board on the far side, so that the ears can be thrown against it without looking. A good man could pick 100 bushels in a day. His hands would be cut to pieces by the husks by the end of the first week, and then they would harden, and then it did not matter. Beyond the last ploughed field, the country changes character entirely, and it belongs to the cattle. There are perhaps 2,000 head running on the open range within a day ride of here, and they belong to 4 or 5 outfits, and they are not fenced, and they are not in a field. They are simply out there, on grass that belongs to nobody in particular, drifting with the weather. They are longhorns, or the beginning of the mixture that will replace them, and they are lean and long-legged and about half wild. A longhorn can walk 15 miles to water and back, and lose very little weight doing it, and that ability is the entire reason the cattle trade of the 70s existed at all. The way you know whose animal is whose is the brand, burned into the hide with an iron in the spring, and the brands are recorded in a book at the county seat, and reading them is a skill. Twice a year, the outfits gather and sort it all out at the roundup. In between, the cattle mind themselves, and a small number of men ride out to see that nothing has gone badly wrong. It looks like freedom from a distance. Up close, it is mostly weather, dust, and the slow arithmetic of grass. The cowboy is 24 years old. He is paid $25 to $30 a month with food, and he works about 14 hours a day for 6 months of the year and is laid off for the rest. About 1 in 4 of the men doing this work is Mexican, and about 1 in 5 or 6 is black, and a good number of the rest are the sons of farmers who could not stand another summer of walking behind a plow. Almost none of them own the cattle. Almost none of them own the horse. Most of them own a saddle, a bedroll, a rope, and a coat. His clothes are working equipment, and every part of them has a reason. The wide hat keeps rain and sun off and can water a horse. The bandana is for dust and for 100 other things. The leather chaps are for riding through thorn scrub at speed. The tall boots with the underslung heel are for staying in a stirrup and not being dragged. He carries a revolver more often for snakes, signaling and stampeding cattle than for men, and he sells it in a bad month without much sentiment. He is tired most of the time, has trouble with his back by 30, and refers to what he does simply as working cattle. Nobody in 1878 is calling it romantic. If those cattle are going north to the railroad, then the day looks like this, and it looks like this for 2.5 months. The cook is up at 3, and the smell of coffee and salt pork reaches the men in their bedrolls on the ground around 4. Breakfast is at first light, and it is eaten standing. The horse wrangler brings in the loose horses, and each man ropes out the animal he wants for the morning, because one horse cannot do a whole day of this, and every man has a string of 6 or 8. By sunrise the herd is up and moving, and it moves at about 2 miles an hour, because cattle that are pushed lose weight, and weight is money. 12 to 15 miles is a good day. The men ride in fixed positions, 2 at the head to set the direction, 2 on each side, and at the very back, in everything the herd kicks up, the 2 youngest and newest men, riding in a wall of dust for 10 hours, which is the job every single one of them started with. Noon is a stop for water, then more of the same, then bedding the herd down at dusk and the night watches, 2 hours each, riding slow circles around 1,500 sleeping animals in the dark. The reason a man sings on the night watch is not sentiment. It is that a sudden sound in the dark will put 1,500 cattle on their feet and running in 4 seconds, and a steady human voice, going on and on, keeps that from happening. So he rides at a walk around the outside of the herd, and he sings whatever he knows. Hymns mostly. Old sentimental songs from before the war. Long dull ballads with 40 verses. And when the verses run out, he makes up more. And when he runs out of those, he simply talks to the cattle about nothing at all. The other rider is going the opposite way around the circle, so that they pass each other twice an hour, and both of them can tell the other one is still awake. A stampede, when it comes out of nothing. A lightning flash, a tumbling weed, a man striking a match. The whole herd is up and gone in one motion, and the only thing to be done is to ride at the front of it in the dark and turn the leaders gradually into a circle until the herd is chasing its own tail and slows down. Men were killed doing that, mostly by their horses putting a foot in a hole. It was the thing they were actually afraid of. The chuck wagon is the center of the world for those 2.5 months, and the cook is the second most important man in the outfit and behaves accordingly. It is an ordinary farm wagon with a tall box built onto the back of it, and the back of the box lets down on a hinge to make a work table, and behind that are drawers and pigeonholes holding flour, salt, coffee, beans, sugar, sourdough starter, tobacco, needles, thread, and a bottle of whiskey that is for medical purposes and is treated as such. Underneath the wagon hangs a rawhide sling called the possum belly, and into it goes firewood or dried cattle chips, picked up along the way, because a cook who arrives at the evening ground with nothing to burn is a cook with a problem. The food is beans, salt pork, biscuits, dried fruit, and coffee. Beef, in an outfit surrounded by $4,000 of beef, is eaten rarely, and usually only when an animal has broken a leg. The cook drives ahead of the herd so that when the men arrive, the fire is going. He also sets the wagon tongue pointing at the North Star each night, so that in the morning, in featureless country, the outfit knows which way it is going. Back at the homestead, the 3 enemies are wind, fire, and the lack of a fence, and only one of them was ever really solved. There is no timber for rails, so for years there was no way to keep anything out or in. Then in 1874, a man in Illinois patented a twisted double wire with barbs wound into it, and by 1878 it is being sold by the hundredweight in every store on the plains, and it changes this country more than any gun ever did. Fire is the thing people watch for. Prairie fire in a dry autumn can run faster than a horse, and the sky goes brown, and the smell arrives before anything else. The defense is a fire break, ploughed in strips around the buildings, and a backfire lit deliberately to burn the ground bare before the real fire arrives. Everybody in the county turns out for someone else's fire, with wet sacks and barrels in the wagon, and nobody has to be asked. And the wind simply does not stop. It blows for days. It moves the dust in under the door, and it makes the ropes hum. And there were women out here who wrote in their letters that it was the wind, more than the loneliness, that wore them down. 1.5 miles east, the Nelsons still live in a dugout, which is a room cut back into the side of a low bank with a front wall of sod and a roof of poles and grass and earth. It is warmer than this house in January and cooler in July, and it is dark all year, and when it rains, the roof leaks in slow brown drops for a day and a half. They will build a board house when the wheat comes in, and they have been going to build it since '76. Distance is the fact that governs everything socially. 1.5 miles is a neighbor. 4 miles is a town. 11 miles is somebody you see 3 times a year. And the practical result is that when people do meet, they stop, and they talk for a long time, and they are not in a hurry, and they will give you dinner without any discussion of it at all. The other result is that everybody helps at the things one family cannot do alone. Raising a barn, threshing, butchering, sickness, a birth, a death. There is no charity in it, and nobody calls it kindness. It is simply understood that next year it will be you standing in somebody else's yard, needing 4 more pairs of hands. The wagon leaves the yard a little after 8, and it will take 1.25 hours to go 4 miles, and nobody thinks that is slow. The road is not a road. It is 2 ruts worn into the grass by everybody who has driven this way since '72, and it goes where the ground is easiest, rather than where a straight line would go. In wet weather, it is a trench of black gumbo that will take a wheel to the hub. In dry weather, it is a ribbon of fine dust that hangs in the air behind you for 1/4 mile. There are no signs. There is no bridge over the draw. Only a place where the bank has been cut down at an angle, and the wagon goes through the bottom and up the other side with everybody leaning. In the box behind the seat are 2 crates of eggs packed in straw, 4 pounds of butter wrapped in wet cloth in a covered pail, a sack of wheat for the mill, and a list written in pencil on the back of an envelope. The boy comes because it is Saturday. The daughter comes because there is thread to be matched, and her mother trusts her eye. The old man stays, because the trip hurts him now, and he will sit in the doorway and watch the road until they are out of sight. The town appeared here for one reason, which is that it is a day drive from 3 directions, and it has been standing for 6 years, and it consists of one street 200 yards long. The first thing you notice is the false fronts. Almost every building on the street is a plain gabled wooden box, and almost every one of them has a tall, flat, square front nailed onto it facing the road, standing a story higher than the actual building behind it, painted with the name of the business across it in large letters. It is theatre, and everybody knows it is theatre, and it is done anyway, because a town that looks like a real town attracts a railroad and a bank and more people, and a town that looks like 6 sheds does not. The street itself is dirt, 60 feet wide, because the surveyors laid out room for a wagon and team to turn around in. It is dust to the ankle in October and mud to the knee in April, and there is a boardwalk down each side, raised a foot above it, which is how you keep your one good pair of boots. There are hitching rails, water troughs, and a great many dogs, and along the whole 200 yards, on a Saturday, perhaps 60 people. The general store is dim, and it smells of coffee, kerosene, leather, cured tobacco, and the vinegar barrel by the door, and this is the single most important building in the county. Everything is behind the counter or above it, bolts of calico and gingham on a slanted rack, boots hanging by their laces from the ceiling, barrels of flour, crackers, salt, molasses, and pickles, all measured out by the storekeeper into whatever the customer has brought to carry it in. Coffee in the bean, sugar in the loaf and in the sack, nails sold by the pound out of a keg. There is almost no cash involved. The eggs and the butter are weighed and counted and set against the account in a ledger, and the flour and the coal oil are taken away against the same account, and the ledger is settled up properly once a year in the autumn when the wheat is sold, and in a bad year it is not settled at all and is carried over. That ledger is the real economy of this county. The storekeeper knows more about the finances of every family within 12 miles than the bank does, and he decides quietly, every week, which families he can carry through the winter. He does not talk about it. That is understood too. On the counter, at the end, under a stone to keep the wind off it, is a thick paper catalogue from a company in Chicago, and it is the most read book in the West after the Bible. It sells everything: stoves, saddles, sewing machines, corsets, pocket watches, violins, wallpaper, tombstones. The prices are printed plainly, which is the whole point, because for the first time, a family 100 miles from anywhere can know exactly what a thing ought to cost, and can order it without being at the mercy of the one store in town. The pages are read aloud in the evenings the way other people read novels. Children learn their numbers from it. Later, when it falls apart, it is hung on a nail in the outhouse and used for the obvious purpose, and the slick-colored pages at the front are widely disliked for it. Orders go out with the mail and come back 6 weeks later on the freight wagon, and the day the crate arrives at the store is a small event, and a neighbor will come by to see what was in it. The family here has ordered exactly 2 things from it in 4 years: a clock spring and a pair of spectacles for the old man, chosen by trying the printed lines on the page until the letters came clear. 2 doors down is the blacksmith, and you can hear him from the far end of the street, which is a sound of 2 notes, the flat ring of the hammer on hot iron, and the higher, lighter ring on the anvil face between blows. He is not a farrier only, he is the machine shop, the hardware repair, the tool maker, and the wheelwright for 100 square miles. He sets wagon tires, and that is worth watching. The iron hoop is heated in a ring of fire until it grows just enough to slip over the wooden wheel, and then it is dropped on and quenched with water, and it shrinks and binds the whole wheel together, hissing and steaming, in about 15 seconds. He shoes the horses, which takes about an hour a horse, and costs $1.50 a set. He makes hinges, hooks, chain links, plowshares, and the small iron pieces that break at the worst possible time. His shop is dark on purpose. A smith judges the temperature of iron by its color, and daylight ruins that, so the walls are unpainted and the one window faces north. The boy stands in the doorway watching the sparks for as long as he is allowed to, which is until his father comes out of the store and calls him. There are 2 saloons on this street, which for a town of 200 people is about the usual proportion, and at 11 in the morning both of them are open and neither of them is full. Inside it is one long narrow room with a plank bar, a mirror behind it if the owner is doing well, and a shelf if he is not, a stove in the middle, 3 tables, and sawdust on the floor, which is swept out and replaced weekly. The whiskey is not what the films suggest. Good rye and bourbon exist and cost a good deal. What sells for a nickel or a dime a glass is often a barrel of raw spirit, doctored in the back room with water, burnt sugar for color, and whatever else came to hand. Beer is available in the towns with ice, and warm elsewhere, and it is drunk faster for that reason. The saloon is also the town hall. It has the only large room, the only stove that is always lit, and the newspapers. Business is done here, elections are argued here, and mail is sometimes left here. The men who come in on a Saturday from 4 miles out drink 1 glass slowly, hear what has happened in the world, and drive home before dark. That is the actual average visit, and it made nobody a legend. Since the town was laid out in 72, there have been 2 men killed in it, and both of those were on the same night, and both of them were drunk, and neither of them was standing in the street at noon. That is roughly what the records show everywhere. The famous cattle towns, in their worst and wildest years, ran to something like 1.5 killings a year each. It was a rough place, and it was rough in ordinary ways, with fists and knives and horses and accidents and whiskey. The face-to-face duel on Main Street, in the way it is remembered, happened perhaps a handful of times in the whole history of the West, and was written into everybody's memory afterwards by dime novels printed in New York and sold to boys in Pennsylvania for 10 cents. What the town actually worried about was fire, because every building is dry pine, and there is no water pressure, and one overturned lamp on a windy night can take the whole street. Every business keeps buckets. There is a ladder and a hook on a rack by the store. The most dangerous things in a western town, honestly counted, were the well, the horse, the fire, and the winter. The law in this county is one sheriff, one deputy, paid by the day when he is needed, and a justice of the peace, who is also the man who owns the lumber yard. The sheriff spends almost none of his time on anything dramatic. He serves papers. He collects taxes, which is actually most of the job and the reason it pays. He arrests men who are drunk and disorderly and puts them in a stone cellar under the courthouse until they are sober, and lets them out in the morning without much ceremony. The one thing the cattle towns did enforce, seriously and immediately, was the ordinance against carrying a gun inside the town limits. A man riding in was expected to check his revolver at the first place he stopped, the store or the livery or the saloon, and collect it when he left. That rule, and not any quick draw, is what actually kept the peace. Beyond the towns, the law is thin and slow. A stolen horse is the crime that people take most personally, because a horse thief on the open plains has effectively left a man to walk. Most disputes are settled long before they reach the sheriff, by neighbours, in a yard, standing up, in a conversation that both men will remember for 30 years. The doctor is 51. He trained for 2 years at a college in Missouri, and he covers 400 square miles in a buggy with one horse. He goes out at any hour, in any weather, and a call 11 miles out in February takes him most of a day and a night. He is paid $2 for a visit in town, more for the country, and often he is paid in chickens or in hay or in nothing at all. What he can actually do is limited, and he knows it. He can set a bone and set it well. He can lance and drain. He can take off a finger or a leg with chloroform or ether if he has it. He can stitch. He can sit with a family through a fever and tell them the truth quietly. His bag holds quinine for the ague, morphine, laudanum, calomel, and whiskey. Half the bottles in it are things that will be understood as useless within 20 years, and a few of them are things that will be understood as harmful. Most children are born without him, with a neighbor woman who has done it 40 times and knows more about it in practice than he does. He is respected out of all proportion to what he can cure, because he comes, and he comes at 3 in the morning, and everybody knows it. Next to the hotel is the barber shop, and it is a barber shop in the old and larger sense of the phrase. A shave is 15 cents, and a haircut is 25, and both come with a hot towel, and the razor is stropped on a leather strap hanging from the arm of the chair with a sound everybody in the room enjoys. Behind a partition at the back are 2 zinc tubs, and for 2 bits you can have a bath in hot water carried in by the pail, and this is the only place in 20 miles where you can be certain of that. A cowboy coming off the trail after 10 weeks will pay for the bath, the shave, the haircut, and then walk next door and buy an entirely new set of clothes and burn the old ones, and this is not an exaggeration but standard practice. The barber is also, quite often, the town dentist. He pulls teeth with a set of forceps and no anesthetic beyond whiskey, and he does it in the same chair and it costs 50 cents. Nobody in this world has ever been to a dentist for anything else. Teeth are cleaned with a rag, or a frayed twig, or salt and soda on a finger, and lost steadily from about 30 onwards. Across the street, in a narrow building with a window, is the newspaper, and it is 4 pages, and it comes out on Thursdays. The editor is 29, sets every letter of it by hand out of a case of type, and prints it on a flatbed press worked by a lever, 1 sheet at a time, 240 copies. 3 of the 4 pages are national news and serialized fiction bought as pre-printed sheets from a syndicate. The 1 local page is what people buy it for. That page has the wheat and cattle prices, the arrival of the freight, who has come to visit whom, whose daughter is married, whose barn burned, and a column of small advertisements. It also has a great deal of enthusiastic writing about how this town is certain to get the railroad, which every town on the plains is printing at the same time about itself. It costs $2 a year, and subscriptions are paid in potatoes as often as in money. The old man at the homestead reads it aloud in the evening, all 4 pages, over 3 nights, including the advertisements, and the family listens, because it is the only thing arriving from outside. Twice a week, a stagecoach comes through, and once a month, a freight outfit does, and between them, they are the whole of this place connection to the rest of the country. The stage is not the polished coach of the pictures either. It is a mud wagon, lighter and cheaper, with canvas sides that roll down in weather, pulled by 4 horses changed at stations every 12 or 15 miles. 9 passengers inside, if 9 can be persuaded to fit. It travels at about 5 miles an hour on this road, and it costs roughly 10 cents a mile. The published advice to passengers is genuinely printed and genuinely serious. Do not smoke a strong pipe inside. Spit with the wind, not against it. Do not discuss politics or religion. If the horses run away, sit still and take your chances. Do not imagine that the driver wants to hear your advice. The freight wagon is a different animal. 10 or 12 tons behind 8 or 10 mules, doing 12 to 15 miles a day, carrying everything that the town does not grow or make, which is nearly everything: stoves, glass, nails, coffee, coal oil, wire and lumber. Every board in that false-fronted street came in on one of those wagons. By 3 in the afternoon, the wagon is loaded and turned around, and the town is behind them, and the light has gone long and yellow across the grass. In the box there is 50 pounds of flour, 10 of sugar, 5 of coffee green in the bean, a gallon of coal oil in a can, with a potato pushed onto the spout to stop it slopping, a card of buttons, 2 yards of black thread, a paper of needles, a ploughshare mended and still smelling of the forge, and a stick of striped peppermint candy divided in half. The mill has taken its toll out of the wheat in flour, which is how a mill is paid, and the ledger at the store has moved by $4.60 in the right direction because of the eggs and the butter. Nobody talks much on the way home. The boy sleeps sitting up against the sacks with his mouth open. The daughter watches the grass go by. Halfway home they pass the Nelsons going the other way, and both wagons stop, and the two men talk for 11 minutes about rain, wire, and a horse being sold at Hutchinson, and then both wagons go on. The house comes up over the swell of the ground with the smoke standing straight above it, which means the wind has dropped, which means frost tonight. The reason this family is here at all is a piece of paper, and the paper is 11 years older than the house. The law says that a citizen, or somebody intending to become one, who is the head of a family or 21 years of age, may file on 160 acres of surveyed public land. The filing fee is small. Then they must live on it, build a dwelling on it, and cultivate part of it for 5 continuous years. After that, with 2 neighbours swearing to it in front of the land office, the land becomes theirs outright. 5 years is the whole of it. 5 winters, 5 summers, 5 chances for the weak to fail. Roughly half the people who filed did not last the 5 years, and their houses stood empty on the grass afterwards, with the door swinging, and somebody else came along and filed on the same ground. This family has been here 4 years and 1 month. Next autumn, if nothing goes badly wrong, the father will drive 60 miles to the land office with 2 neighbours and make final proof, and receive a printed certificate signed on behalf of the president, and put it in the trunk under the good coat. They talk about that certificate the way other people talk about a wedding. If you had stood on that street on a Saturday and looked properly, the crowd would not have matched the picture in your head. There is a Swedish family 4 miles north who have been here 2 years and are still learning the language from the newspaper. There are Germans from Russia in the next county who brought hard red winter wheat with them in their baggage, and who will, without any fuss at all, change what the whole of Kansas grows. There is a black homesteading community 60 miles east, founded by families who came up from Kentucky and Tennessee in 77 and 78, several thousand people in a few years, farming their own ground for the first time in their lives. There is a Chinese laundry in the county seat, run by 2 men who came off the railroad grading crews when the work ended. There are Irish, Bohemians, Norwegians, Mexicans working cattle, and men from Ohio and Missouri who fought on opposite sides 15 years ago and now share a threshing machine. And there are the people whose country this was, and who were moved off it within living memory of everybody standing on that street, and whose absence is the single largest fact in the landscape, though almost nobody in the town says so out loud. The grass this family is ploughing was not empty, and it had not been empty for a very long time. For centuries, it was the country of the horse nations of the southern plains, and their year moved with the buffalo, north in the spring and south in the autumn, in an economy that was complete and self-sustaining, and older than any town on this map. Then in a single decade the buffalo were shot for their hides, 3 million of them and more, killed by commercial hunters supplying tanneries in the east, and the bones were afterwards gathered off the prairie by homesteaders and sold by the ton for fertilizer at $8 a ton, and that bone money kept a good many families like this one alive in the bad years. By 1878, the herds are gone, and the nations that lived with them have been moved south onto reservations in Indian Territory, and the treaties that arranged it were made and broken in Washington by men who had never seen this grass. Out here you can still find the wallows, shallow dish-shaped hollows where buffalo rolled, holding rainwater, and you find the bones, and the stone chips, and the ring of stones where a lodge stood. The family plows around one of those rings on the west quarter. Nobody has ever discussed why. The school is a single room 2.5 miles away, built of the same boards as everything else, with a bell on a post and a coal stove in the middle and a privy behind. The teacher is 19 years old. She has an 8th grade education herself and a certificate from an examination taken at the county seat, and she is paid $25 a month for the 3 or 4 months of the year that school keeps. She boards with a different family every few weeks because part of her pay is being fed. She teaches everybody from 5 to 16 in the same room at the same time, which is done by calling each group forward to a bench at the front in turn while the others work at their slates. They learn reading out of a graded reader, arithmetic, including a great deal of practical measuring and interest, spelling, penmanship, and geography, and they memorize enormous amounts of poetry and recite it standing up. School keeps in winter, when the children can be spared from the fields, and stops in the spring, and stops entirely if there is a blizzard, or the stovepipe falls, or the teacher marries, which happens frequently. The boy walks it in 40 minutes. In January he walks it in the dark both ways. Church happens when there is a preacher, and there is a preacher about every 3rd Sunday, because he rides a circuit of 5 settlements and does them in rotation. He arrives on Saturday evening and stays with whichever family has room, and on Sunday morning the service is held in the schoolhouse with the benches turned around. There is singing, without an instrument, everybody together and rather slowly. There is a sermon of 50 minutes. There are announcements about a barn raising and a sick woman on the North Road. Afterwards there is dinner, spread on the boards outside if the weather allows. And this is the actual point of the day for most of the people there, because it is the only time in the month when 40 people are in one place. The children run themselves into exhaustion. The men stand in a group and discuss wheat, wire, and weather in that order. The women sit and talk, and the talking is not small talk, because these are women who see one another once a month and have a great deal to say. On the Sundays when there is no preacher, the family stays home, and the old man reads a chapter aloud after breakfast, and then the day is quiet, and it is the only quiet day there is. The mail comes to the store twice a week, and a letter from the East takes between 9 days and 3 weeks, and it is read many more times than that. Postage is 3 cents. Paper is expensive enough that people write to the very edge of the sheet, and then some of them turn it 90 degrees and write across their own lines again in the other direction, so that the page is a crosshatch, and the reader learns to follow one direction and then the other. The letters that went east were mostly cheerful and mostly not entirely honest. Nobody wanted their mother in Ohio to know how thin the winter had been, so they wrote about the size of the sky and the price of land and how well the children looked, and left out the rest. The letters that came west were read aloud at the table, and then read again alone, and then kept in the trunk, tied with string, and reread in February. The woman of this house has a sister in Indiana whom she has not seen in 4 years, and expects, in a way she has not said aloud to anybody, never to see again. That is the real cost of this country, and it does not appear in any account book. There is a thing that people out here date everything by, and it happened 4 years ago, and they still start sentences with the year of the Grasshoppers. They came in the last week of July, in the middle of the afternoon, out of a clear sky in the northwest. What people saw first was a haze, and then a glittering, like snow that could not be snow, and then the sun went a strange dull color, and the sound arrived, which was a low, continuous rattling, and then they came down. They were 4 to 6 inches deep on the ground. They ate the corn, the wheat, the garden, the leaves, the bark off young trees, the wool on a sheep back, the handles of tools where sweat had soaked into the wood, the curtains at a window, and the paint off a wagon. They stopped the trains because the crushed bodies made the rails too slick for the wheels to grip. They stayed for several days and then lifted and went south and left the country bare and brown in August. Half the families in this county walked away that autumn. This family stayed on a barrel of borrowed flour and a great deal of stubbornness, and they do not tell the story often, and when they do, it is told flatly, with the details in the right order. The weather here is not a background condition. It is the largest character in the story, and it is not friendly. Summer runs to 105 degrees with a wind out of the south that feels like a door opening on an oven, and the wheat can be burnt out in 3 days at the wrong moment in June. Hail comes in June and July and can flatten a whole quarter section in 8 minutes. Drought comes for a year and sometimes for 3. And then there are the tornadoes, which arrive in the spring with a green sky and a stillness beforehand that everybody learns to recognize. There is a hole dug into the bank near the door with a plank door on it, and it holds the family and the potatoes. Winter is the serious one. The blizzard of January 1888 will come down in the middle of a mild afternoon while the children are at school, drop 70 degrees in a few hours, and kill several hundred people across the plains, many of them children walking home. That is 10 years away from this October, but every family out here already knows to string a rope from the house to the barn before the snow starts, because a man can lose the way between the two and freeze 40 feet from his own door. When somebody in this house gets sick, the first thing that happens is that the woman of the house goes to the shelf, because a doctor 11 miles away is the last resort and not the first. There is a bottle of camphor, a tin of mustard for plasters, turpentine, castor oil, quinine, and a jar of goose grease that gets rubbed on a chest and covered with flannel and left there for 3 days. There is sulphur and molasses in the spring for reasons nobody could defend. There is whiskey kept for medicine and used for medicine, and also, occasionally, otherwise. The illnesses are ordinary and frequently fatal. Typhoid from a well too near a privy. Diphtheria, which takes children in a week and takes them in 2s and 3s out of the same house. Pneumonia, the ague, which is malaria and which is everywhere in the river bottoms. Milk sickness, infection in a wound that would be nothing at all today. About 1 child in 5 did not reach the age of 5, and every family on this road has a small fenced square somewhere on the quarter section, or a name in the front of the Bible with 2 dates close together. They spoke of it plainly and grieved privately, and went on working because the cow still had to be milked that evening. It would be a mistake to leave the impression that nobody out here ever enjoyed themselves, because they did, and they did it thoroughly when the chance came. There is dancing. Somebody has a fiddle, and somebody else can call the figures, and a house is cleared of furniture, and 40 people dance in a 12 by 16 room until 3 in the morning, with the children asleep in a row on the bed under the coats. There are box suppers, where the women pack a supper in a decorated box, and the men bid on them without knowing whose is whose, and the money goes to the school, and everybody knows perfectly well whose box is whose. There is a spelling bee, taken seriously by adults. There are horse races down the main street on a Saturday, settled by argument. There is hunting, which is half sport and half supper. And there is the ordinary pleasure of talk, which in a place this empty is the great entertainment. Somebody who can tell a story well is a valuable person here, and knows it, and is asked to. In the evening, at home, there is a harmonica, and singing, and a deck of cards worn soft at the corners. Everybody in this county is waiting for the same thing, and it is a line of iron rails, and it will decide whether this town exists in 20 years. The railroad means the wheat can go east, and the price of it will rise by 12 or 15 cents a bushel, simply because the wagon haul is gone. It means lumber arrives cheaply. It means a bank, a hotel, a church with a steeple, and land worth 4 times what it is worth today. The towns that got it grew. The towns that missed it by 6 miles disappeared inside a decade, and their false fronts were pulled down and carted to the new place and nailed up again there. So the town has a committee, and the committee has been to see the company twice, and there is talk of the county voting bonds to buy stock in the line, which is exactly what half the counties on the plains did, and which left a good many of them paying for a railroad that never arrived. The newspaper prints a paragraph about the survey every week, whether there is any news or not. Out here, on the homestead, they think about it in a simpler way. 12 cents a bushel on 400 bushels is $48, and $48 is the windmill. In the second week of November, when the weather has turned cold enough to keep meat, and not yet cold enough to freeze a man's hands to a knife handle, there is butchering. It is done with neighbours, because it cannot be done alone. 2 families come over, and a fire is built under the big iron kettle in the yard before daylight, and the water is heated for scalding. The hog is killed quickly and bled, and then scalded and scraped clean of bristles, and then hung from a tripod of poles to cool, and every part of that animal is going to be used, and there is no sentiment about any of it. The hams and the shoulders and the sides go into a barrel packed with salt, and later some of them go into a small smokehouse built of boards, hung over a slow smouldering fire of green corn cobs for 3 days. The fat is rendered down in the kettle into lard, and the crisp scraps that come out of it are eaten warm and are the best thing anybody will eat all year. The trimmings become sausage, ground and seasoned with sage grown by the door. By dark it is finished, and the wives divide the fresh meat between the households, because none of them can keep it, and next month it will be somebody else's hog, and the meat will come back the other way. It is worth knowing the actual numbers, because they explain almost everything about how carefully these people lived. 160 acres of land, filed on and proved up, costs about $18 in fees over 5 years. A cast iron cook stove, $30. A steel windmill on its tower, $120. A good workhorse, $60. A milk cow, $25. A wagon, $65. A breaking plow, $22. Flour is $2.50 for 100 pounds. Coffee is 1/4 pound green. Sugar is 10 cents. Coal oil is 30 cents the gallon. Calico is 8 cents a yard, and a pair of boots is $3, and a boy is expected to make them last a year. Against all that, wheat is bringing perhaps 70 cents a bushel at the wagon, and a good quarter section might make 400 bushels in a good year, and there are not many good years in a row. Which means a family income of $280 against a stove and a windmill and a wagon. That is why the ledger at the store carries over. That is why the egg money matters. And that is why a man will drive 11 miles to save 40 cents. People marry young out here, and they marry practically, and a wedding is not an expensive thing. She is 19, and he is 23, which is about the average, and they have known each other for 2 years across a distance of 6 miles. There has been a good deal of driving a buggy home from church, and some standing in a yard talking, and almost no privacy of any kind at any point. The wedding happens in a house, in the front room of her parents, with the preacher on his circuit, on a Thursday, because he is here on Thursday. She wears her best dress, which is a good dark wool she will go on wearing to church for 10 years, and not white, because white is for people who can afford a dress worn once. There are perhaps 30 people. There is a dinner afterwards that the women have been cooking for 2 days. Somebody has a fiddle. Then the 2 of them drive out to a quarter section with nothing on it but a stake and a pile of cut sod, and they begin, with a stove, a bed, a cow, and one plough, exactly as her mother did, and her mother before that. Everyone at the dinner knows precisely how hard the next 5 years are going to be, and nobody says so. A child out here is not a spectator, and starts being useful at about 4, and nobody thinks this is unkind. At 4 they carry kindling and gather eggs. At 6 they drive the cow to the section line and back, and mind a smaller child while the mother is at the wash. At 8 they weed the garden, feed the chickens, and turn the churn. At 10 a boy is leading a team and a girl is cooking a meal alone. At 12 they are doing most of what an adult does, slower. In between they play, and what they play with is what there is. A corncob wrapped in a rag scrap makes a doll. A barrel hoop and a stick makes an afternoon. There is a swing on a rope. There is the draw, a mile west, which is the whole geography of a childhood out here, with its sand cherries and its snake holes and its one cottonwood tree. There is very little bought. A store doll is a thing a girl might get once, at 8, and keep for 60 years. And there is an enormous amount of empty grass and empty sky to be alone in, and children raised out here remembered that, mostly, as the good part. The blizzards come out of the northwest, and the thing about them is not the cold and not the depth, but the fact that you cannot see. It begins with the sky closing down flat and grey, and the wind going round to the north, and then fine dry snow moving horizontally so that the barn 40 feet away is not there any more. Out in that, a person can walk in a circle and not know it. So the rope goes up, it is tied to the door latch and run to the stable, and a man goes hand over hand along it to feed the horses and comes back the same way. And that rope is the difference between 2 families this winter. Inside, the house is banked with earth and manure around the bottom of the walls, and rag strips are stuffed into the cracks in the floorboards, and the family stays in the one room for 2 days, or 3, with the stove going and the hay knots going into it steadily, and the pile by the door going down. There is nothing to do but wait. They read the Almanac, they talk. The children are impossible by the second afternoon, and then it stops, and the sky opens, and it is blue and blinding and utterly silent, and somebody goes out to see how many chickens are left. On the shelf beside the Bible is a thin paper almanac, and it is consulted more often than either of them. It has the calendar, the phases of the moon, the times of sunrise and sunset for every day of the year, the dates of the fairs, a great deal of advertising for patent medicine, and a weather forecast for the whole 12 months made a year in advance, which everybody knows is guesswork and everybody reads anyway. Planting is done by the moon. Root crops in the dark of the moon, things that bear above the ground in the light of it. Hogs are butchered on a waxing moon, so the meat will not shrink in the pan. Fence posts are set in the old moon, so they will not heave. And beyond the almanac there are the signs, which are read off the country itself. A ring around the moon means weather within 3 days. Cattle lying down altogether means rain. Smoke lying flat means rain coming. Smoke standing straight means frost tonight. Thick husks on the corn mean a hard winter. Some of it is nonsense, and some of it is a very good barometer, and the people using it could not always tell you which was which, and were right often enough that it did not matter. Every few weeks somebody comes up the track who does not live here, and the rule about that is simple and is not negotiable. You feed him. Whoever he is, whatever hour it is, he is given a meal and coffee, and if it is late, he sleeps in the stable on the hay, and in the morning he is fed again, and he goes on. Nothing is charged, and nothing is expected, because the country is empty, and a man turned away from a door here might not reach the next one. They are mostly looking for work. Harvest hands walking north with the ripening, following the wheat from Texas to Dakota over 3 months. Men laid off the railroad grade, men who have failed at a claim 2 counties over and are going back east and will not say so directly. They bring news, which is worth the supper by itself, and they are asked for it. Prices, weather, who is hiring, what the road is like north of the river. The father makes a judgment at the door in about 4 seconds and is right most of the time. Twice in 4 years he has kept the shotgun where he could reach it, and both times nothing at all happened. In the morning the man is gone and the hay is folded flat. By the time all of that has been thought about, the sun is already low, and the shadow of the house is running out across the grass to the east, longer than the house is tall. This is the hour when the country looks best, and everybody out here knew it. The light comes in almost flat and turns the bleached grass the color of a new rope, and every rut and furrow throws a shadow, and the whole flat empty world briefly has texture in it. The horses know the hour. The cow starts for the house on her own from wherever she has been standing. The chickens begin drifting toward the shed. A hawk goes over very high, going somewhere with purpose. The father stands at the end of the broken ground for a minute, with the reins in one hand, not doing anything in particular, looking east at the shadow of his own house, lying out on his own land, and then he clicks his tongue at the horses, and they turn for the stable. 4 miles east, in the town, they are lighting the lamp in the store window. And out here, the temperature is already starting to drop, and the wind is going down with the sun, the way it usually does. The light goes at about 5:30 now, and the last hour of it belongs to the animals. The cow is brought in from the section line and milked into a tin pail, and the sound of that changes as the pail fills, from a thin ring to a soft, even hiss. The milk is carried in and strained through a cloth into the shallow pans and set in the coolest corner. The horses are watered and fed, and the harness is hung on its pegs, and the collars are turned face out so they dry. The chickens have already put themselves to bed. The door of the low shed is closed and dropped on its latch, because there are coyotes, and there is a badger somewhere along the draw that took 4 birds in September and has not been forgiven. The last bucket of water for the night is drawn and set inside the door. The wood, which is not wood, is brought in, an armful of twisted hay, and chips stacked by the stove where it will dry. And then everybody is inside, and the door is shut, and the wind is on the other side of it. And the difference between those two things is the whole reason for building a house at all. Supper is smaller than breakfast and smaller than dinner, because the day work is over and there is no more sense in it. Tonight there is cornbread and milk and fried potatoes with onion, and the last of the beans that have been in the back of the stove since morning, with a piece of salt pork buried in them. There is butter, and there is sorghum syrup in a jug, poured over the cornbread by everybody except the old man, who considers it a habit for children. They eat in the lamplight, at the crate table, with the stove ticking as it cools. Talk at supper is the report of the day, and it is practical. The ploughshare is mended. The eggs made $4.60. The Nelsons say there is a threshing outfit at Hutchinson that will come this way. Somebody has bought the empty quarter on the South Road, which nobody expected. The daughter says that the thread was matched exactly and shows it, and her mother holds it against the cloth by the lamp and agrees. Then the plates are cleared and washed in the pan on the stove, in water that is used for that and then used for something else, and the table becomes what it is for the rest of the evening. Nobody in this house simply sits, but the evening work is a slower kind of work, and it is done together in one circle of lamplight, and it is the best hour of the day. The mother mends. There is always mending. A knee, a cuff, a torn sheet turned side to middle so that the worn part goes to the edges, and the whole thing lasts another 2 years. The daughter is piecing a quilt, and the pieces are the parts of worn-out clothing that were not too far gone, and she can tell you which shirt each square was, and who wore it, and when. The father works leather, a rein, a hamestrap, a boot sole. He has an awl, waxed thread, and a piece of harness leather saved from something that broke last spring. The boy shells seed corn into a pan, the good ears saved for next year, and after a while he stops and starts drawing on his slate instead, and nobody says anything about it. And the old man twists hay into hard, tight knots for the morning fire, one after another, his hands moving without his eyes, and he has done 10,000 of them, and will do 10,000 more. Some evenings there is reading, and some evenings there is a story, and tonight it is the old man's turn, because the newspaper has been finished. He tells about coming west the first time, in 1852, when he was 25, on a road that went the whole way across to Oregon, and was already worn into ruts, a foot deep, by the wagons ahead of him. He tells it very slowly, and with a great many pauses, and it is not a dramatic story. It is about mud, and the price of flour at Fort Laramie, and a mule called Dan that would not cross water, and a woman who baked bread for the whole train on a fire made of buffalo chips because there was no wood for 200 miles. The children have heard it 11 times. They ask the same questions in the same places, because that is part of it. There is no ending to the story. He simply arrives at the mountains, and then he stops and looks at the stove for a while, and says that it was a long time ago and that there was more grass then. Nobody fills the silence. The lamp burns. The wind comes around the north corner of the house. The prairie at night is not silent, and after a few weeks out here, a person can read it without waking properly. The wind first, which is the floor of everything, going through the grass with a dry, continuous sound like a slow river a long way off. It changes note when it comes round the corner of the house, and it lifts one loose shingle over the ceiling boards, always the same one. Then the coyotes, somewhere south, 3 or 4 of them, making a sound that seems like a great many more, rising and breaking up and stopping all at once. The dog under the step lifts his head for that and puts it down again. There is a cow shifting. There is a horse blowing out through its nose in the lean-to. There are mice in the wall, working steadily, and everybody has stopped hearing them. And very rarely, on a clear, cold night with the wind right, a train whistle from 30 miles away, faint and long, arriving at a homestead where nobody has ever ridden on a train. That sound goes into the dark and out over the grass, and there is nothing between it and the next county but 40 miles of nothing at all. At about 8:30, the lamp is turned down, and the last thing to be done is the fire, and it is done carefully because tomorrow depends on it. The damper is closed most of the way. The remaining coals are raked into a compact heap at the center of the firebox, and a covering of fine ash is drawn over them with the poker, closing them off from the air, so that they will hold a slow red heart until morning, without burning through. The ash pan is not emptied at night. The kettle is set to the back of the stove, where it will stay warm. The water bucket is set where it will not freeze, which is close to the stove and not against the wall. Then the lamp is blown out, and for a moment the room is entirely dark, and then it is not, because there is a thin orange line around the door of the stove, and the grate glows faintly through the small holes in the front. That line of light is what a person out here sees last before sleeping and first on waking for years. The chimney ticks as it cools. Somebody outside would see the smoke standing straight up in the moonlight from a stovepipe on an empty plain 4 miles from the nearest other one. Going to bed is a short business because it is cold and because everybody has been up since 4:30. The straw tick is pulled back out from under the bed and laid along the west wall. The quilts are shaken out. The children go behind the calico curtain in the corner one at a time and come out in what they will sleep in, which for the boy is the shirt he wore today. A warming brick has been sitting at the back of the stove since supper, wrapped now in a piece of flannel, and it goes down at the foot of the bed, and it will still be faintly warm at 2 in the morning. There are prayers said kneeling on the floorboards, quickly, out of habit rather than performance. The old man stays in his chair with a quilt over his knees and his feet toward the stove, which is where he sleeps now and where he will sleep for another 2 winters. Then the last movement, and the ropes of the bed creaking as weight comes onto them, and somebody saying something short and quiet that is not really words, and then the house going still. Outside, the frost is coming down onto the grass. It is worth saying plainly, since the title promised it, what would actually have finished you out here, because it is not what people expect. It would not have been an outlaw. You would very likely have gone your whole life on the plains without ever seeing a gun pointed at a person. It would have been the water, carried 80 feet up a rope, 15 trips on a washing day. It would have been the fire that has to be made before the light. It would have been the fact that there is no doctor within 11 miles and no help within a mile and a half, and no way to call either of them. It would have been the winter, when the sky closes down grey in November and does not properly open again until March, and there is nothing to look at, and nobody comes. And most of all, it would have been the sameness, the same 12 by 16 room, the same 4 faces, the same 200 yards of street on a Saturday, the same wind for days, until you began to listen for it stopping. They did it anyway, for years, and mostly without complaining about it, and that is the part that ought to be remembered. By midnight, the fire is a red seam again behind the iron door, and the house is as quiet as it was when we came in. Outside, the moon has come up over an enormous flat country with nothing standing on it, and the grass has gone silver, and the frost is settling out of a clear sky onto every blade of it, and onto the wagon tongue, and onto the plough left standing at the end of the broken ground. 4 miles east, the 200 yards of Main Street is empty, and one lamp is still burning in the back of the newspaper office, and the horses at the livery are asleep standing up. 20 miles west, on the open range, a young man is riding a slow circle around 1,500 cattle in the dark, and singing a hymn to them, badly, because it keeps them lying down. And under all of it, the country goes on, the way it has gone on for a very long time, in every direction, without any particular interest in the small lit windows scattered across it. The clock on the shelf has been ticking since 1864, and it goes on ticking. Nobody hears it. And so the night goes on out there, as it has for a very long time. The stove holds its coals, the wind moves over the grass, and perhaps, by now, so do you. If you are still awake, that is perfectly all right. There is nowhere you need to be, and nothing left to do tonight. You can let the rest of it go. Everything on that quarter section is where it should be. The water is in by the door. The fire is banked. The horses are fed, and the door is shut, and the frost is coming down quietly onto 40 miles of grass in every direction. The archive will be here tomorrow night, as it always is. Sleep well.